say you should never talk religion or politics at the dinner table. There's way too much potential for conflict that can really ruin a pleasant meal. So how do you treat people who disagree with you? Religious people haven't always done this well. In the Czech Republic, back during the time of the Reformation, conflict between the Catholics and the Protestants was dealt with by one group throwing the other out of the tower window. There's even a word for it: defenestration. Today, if you go to a party in the Czech Republic, you may even be warned not to stand too close to the window. The Apostle Paul gives some better advice in the scriptures. As far as it depends on you, he said, live at peace with everyone. Later, he wrote to Timothy saying that God's servants mustn't be quarrelsome, but be kind to everyone. These days, you don't need to go too far on social media to see how difficult it is to do this. So how do we disagree agreeably? Recently, I was asked to be a guest on a podcast, and the format of the podcast was to bring two people into conversation with one another who had very opposing views. And my topic about hearing God's voice was one I'm very passionate about, and my conversation partner was someone who had a very different view on this. And I really had to reflect and think about, okay, how am I going to approach this? How am I going to disagree agreeably? Because there's nothing wrong with disagreeing. We're all going to have a very different perspective. The question comes, how are we going to handle that? Some thoughts that I had around that whole conversation. A few tips that I wanted to share with you today. The first one was that to establish that it's not the goal to be right. The goal is to love. You see, Jesus was very clear that spiritual maturity looks like, first of all, loving God and then loving others. And sometimes we come to a disagreement, and what we want to do is we want to prove ourselves right. We want to get all the arguments together and all the information and use it kind of as a form of attack. We go hard at it. But the question is, as we do that, can we still be loving? Can we think of the other person? I remember in academia, in my studies, that I had to disagree with many different people. And as I was writing up my work in a book, I remember the Holy Spirit saying to me, be kind as you disagree, be loving. The goal is to love, not to be right. And then as we come to disagreement, to look for points of commonality, to look for bridges that can be built. And the reality is this involves active listening. It involves listening to what the person's saying, getting to know them, putting yourself in their position, and coming to a point of understanding. Finally, the truth is we don't have to engage with every argument that we see, every disagreement. In fact, if you have a look at the life of Jesus, you'll see that he was quite selective in terms of who he engaged with at points of difference. I think about Nicodemus, who came to him late at night, had lots of questions, and Jesus gave time to him and engaged in conversation and really nutted out the questions that he had. But then there are other times, for example, when Jesus was being questioned by Pontius Pilate, and he didn't answer the questions. He just didn't engage. I think Jesus understood that those who have ears to hear are the ones who hear. In other words, Jesus was looking for a point of connection where people were open to learning, open to listening. And if someone wasn't open, there was no point disagreeing or engaging in argument. God calls us to live in the way of Jesus. God calls us to love God first and to love others. We can disagree, but the goal is to be loving, to be peaceable, to be kind to everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in to God Conversations today. For more on having your own God conversation, go to godconversations.com. We'll see you next time.